am an alchemist, tending to elements. A quicksilver pool in the palm of my hand. That poisonous looking glass. What do I see? For most people, poetry is either an esoteric, confusing, pretentious art form, or it's the shallow, meaningless, cutesy blurbs that go on greeting cards and love letters. Whenever I tell people that I'm a published poet, I often get various refrains of, "Oh, I never really got poetry, you know?" And yeah, I get it. I didn't really like poetry when I was in school either, and I think that this is actually the biggest problem when it comes to poetry. Most of us have been taught wrong. We've been taught that poetry is supposed to be this challenging, deep, serious thing, and that the reader's job is to try to decipher what the poet was really trying to say. But I am here to tell you that that is all wrong. I'm an English teacher, here to tell you that you need to take all the stuff that all your other English teachers taught you about poetry, especially the idea that there's some deeper meaning that you have to get in order to really appreciate poetry. I want you to gather up all those thoughts and dump them in the trash. What I'd like to do today is talk about poetics, the what, the why, and the how of poetry. I want to bust some myths around poetry. I want to set the record straight about what poems are, what they do, and ultimately, how to write good ones. And this isn't going to be a comprehensive video that covers every single element of poetry writing. There is a reason that there are whole full semester courses and even whole degrees on this kind of thing. But we are going to cover a lot of ground. So, without further ado, let's get started. Before we can do anything else, we first need to define poetry and figure out what the purpose of poetry is. So, what is a poem? Well, like I said in the intro, most people have two different conceptions of poetry. Hallmark card poetry, and the poetry that we were forced to read in school, you know, like Shakespeare and Emily Dickinson and T.S. Eliot. Now, it's this latter category that I want to focus on specifically in this video. And this isn't going to be a takedown of Ralph Waldo Emerson or anything, but I do want to talk about how our academic conception of poetry has given people a warped idea of what makes something a poem. I mean, think about most of the academic poems that you've read. They're mostly rhymey, they're mostly about love or nature or death or other big, vague ideas. They use long, complicated words, they have to fit a certain structure, and they usually have some deeper meaning that it's the reader's job to figure out. When most people think of poems, they think of these stoic, lyrical masterpieces. Poems are for talking about very serious things in a very serious, and let's be honest, pretentious way. These are the poetry rules. They are what makes something a poem. Except they're not. Poems aren't riddles to be solved. They aren't language puzzles full of 12-letter words that poets put into the world to make themselves seem smarter than everyone else. And I know that sometimes it looks this way, but the only reason that we think this is what poetry is because of the poetry we read in school, which, just as an aside, the poetry that you read in school especially... Ow! 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 I love you, honey, but if you're gonna keep biting me on the chin, then you can't be in here, and the people will be very sad. The poetry that you read in school, especially stuff like T.S. Eliot, is actually, for the most part, not good. It does important stuff, and it changed the genre, and it was part of an important artistic movement, but T.S. Eliot wrote stuff like The Waste Land specifically to be a pretentious ass. He made it hard and confusing and elusive on purpose to prove a point. That's like the whole MO of modernism. And if you need evidence of this, evidence that even his contemporaries thought he was kind of a dick, William Carlos Williams, the guy who wrote the Plum poem, said that the wasteland was the great catastrophe of our letters, the blast of Eliot's genius, which gave the poem back to the academics. In other words, T.S. Eliot was a pretentious dweeb, and the wasteland is so difficult that it's going to be used by other pretentious dweebs to make themselves seem clever for getting it, and that's going to make people hate poetry and poets and anyone else who studies poetry. Desmond, please don't. I can't. This is why I don't have the cats in here when I'm filming, because Anyway, that aside, these kinds of academic poems have all these rules, and we think we have to follow them when we're writing poetry, but we don't. But without these rules, how do we know that something is a poem? Well, poetry isn't defined by what's outside, by the structure, the rhyme scheme, the meter. It's defined by what's inside, by its sounds and its use of language and what it does with that language. Poetry is defined by its purpose. And the purpose of poetry is to use interesting language to get people to feel new feelings and think new thoughts. For readers, this means that you don't need to worry about whether or not you've found the deeper meaning that the poet hid somewhere deep between their lines. It means you can take poems at face value. Just read them for what's there on the page. Then, if you read the poem and feel even the slightest pang of emotion or the briefest thought of, I never thought about it like that, then congratulations, you have successfully done a poetry. Now, for poets, this purpose of poetry means that you need to think of your poems like experiences, like snapshots of life, little vignettes that your readers get transplanted into. You need your reader to see the world through your eyes for a single, brief, but infinitely important moment. But what does that actually mean? I mean, what does that actually look like when it comes to putting words on a page? Well, let's find out. O sterling toxin, whose bonds are the bonds of antitoxins, whose very matter makes elixirs, and brought our greatest minds to madness. Who am I to hold you here? How could I build from your blighted bones? What compound could I conjure, whose combination is more than the sum of its parts? When people are writing poetry, a lot of the time they want to start big and work their way down. They want to write a poem about death or love or abuse or heartbreak or whatever, and then they find some kind of image that they believe represents that. And then they talk about that image in terms of those big ideas and feelings. But this will almost always fail, because just talking about feelings doesn't help the reader actually feel those feelings. To show you what I mean by this, take a look at this poem. Her beauty danced in the deep moonlight. I could swim in her eyes for eternity. Alas, I was adrift, heartbroken, lost at sea. All right, so what does that mean? What is actually happening in this poem? If the purpose of poetry is to make us feel stuff and look at stuff in new and interesting ways, how is this poem doing that? Well, it's not. I wrote this poem in like 45 seconds before filming this. It's not good. And the reason that it isn't good is because it's full of abstraction. We know what the word beauty means, but we don't know what it actually looks like. We know what the word heartbroken means, but we don't know what it actually feels like. We know what all these words mean, but just listing them off doesn't make you actually feel those feelings. And this is why a lot of Insta poetry, like the stuff by Rupi Kaur or Gabbie, Hanna or Atticus, is not really very good, usually, because they say stuff like this, but they never actually get us to really feel these things. Poetry is about pulling the reader in and making them feel the thing you want them to feel. And the only way you can do that is through concrete images. As the adage goes, show, don't tell. For a good example of this, let's take a look at the poem After Years by Ted Kooser. Today, from a distance, I saw you walking away, and without a sound, the glittering face of a glacier slid into the sea. An ancient oak fell in the Cumberlands, holding only a handful of leaves, and an old woman scattering corn to her chickens looked up for an instant. At the other side of the galaxy, a star 35 times the size of our own sun exploded and vanished, leaving a small green spot on the astronomer's retina as he stood on the great open dome of my heart with no one to tell. Now, Ted could have just said, "Today I saw my ex and it made me really sad." But he didn't. And he even could have used a cliched melodramatic image like, "Today I saw my ex and it made my heart feel like an exploding sun." But he didn't say that either, because it's cliche and cliches are bad. Instead, he used images to make us experience the feelings for ourselves. We're shown how heartbreak feels, not just told about it. Even if you have never been heartbroken, after reading this poem, you know exactly what it feels like. When you write a poem, you should always be circling back to the real, concrete, tangible images. Those are the foundation that your poem is built on, and without them, your poem will crumble. Now, one thing that you may have noticed about the images in After Years is that Kooser doesn't just include basic images of things, but he makes his images pop by flavoring them with specific details. An ancient oak tree fell in the Cumberlands. A star 35 times the size of our sun left a green spot in the astronomer's retina. These are images that really stick with us because they are weirdly specific. Specificity makes things concrete. Unpredictable details are what make the difference between imaginary stories and real stories. Even if the story you're telling in your poem or the image that you're describing in your poem is fictional, you want it to feel authentic. And authenticity comes from those little details, the details that make people think, "No one could come up with that, it's too weird, it has to be true." For example, if I told you that there was a store that sold purses and bottles of aftershave, that's really boring. I mean, it's true and it's accurate, but it's bland. But if I were to tell you, like Thea Kuticka does in her poem Newcastle Bar and Grill, that a second-hand store displayed gold purses and a man sold Avon aftershave bottles shaped like Model Ts and hot rods, your brain is suddenly like, "Oh, okay, this is new." You can really visualize it. Now, this doesn't mean that you'd need to just cram 1,000 details into your poems, because over-detailing is just as bad as under-detailing. You only want to include the details that add to those concrete images that you're using to elicit feeling or pull the reader into the world of your poem. Use names of things, if you can. Use words with precision. Pepper in images that seem to conflict, like Avon and hot rods, and add in those little details that you could only know if you were really there. Because, at the end of the day, you want your reader to feel like they were really there. You're so loud. You're so loud. How will people be able to hear me if you are a little motor? Now, we've covered how to make people feel like they are really in your poem, and that helps with the experiential and feeling part of the purpose of poetry. But what about the interesting connection thing? What about getting your reader to think about things in a new way? Well, the way you do that is through metaphor. Now, for the rest of this video, I'm going to be using the word metaphor to cover all metaphor-adjacent terms like simile and symbolism and allegory. They're not perfect synonyms, and they all have their own particular definitions, but when I say metaphor, know that I mean any and all metaphoric devices. Russian literary critic Viktor Shklovsky said, and I'm paraphrasing, "Good art makes familiar things feel strange, and strange things feel familiar." He described this concept using the word austranity, which means defamiliarization, but the more literal translation is closer to strangifying. So good art makes things feel strange and alien to us, like we're seeing things for the first time. And this is what metaphor does. Metaphors work because they make connections between otherwise unconnectable things. And making those connections, finding where things overlap, where two totally different things actually have something in common, gives our brains happy signals. Because we like to see how things work together. We like discovery. This is kind of similar to what I talked about in my Lovecraft series with the uncanny. The uncanny scares us because we can't figure it out. We can't make that connection make sense. But metaphors are the opposite. They're appealing because the writer finds a way to make the different things similar. The writer has seen the overlap and illuminates it so you can see it too. By reading their poem, by reading their metaphor, you now see things in a different light. Take Edgar Allan Poe's For Annie. Thank heaven the crisis, the danger is past, and the lingering illness is over at last, and the fever called living is conquered at last. In the first stanza of this poem, Poe gives us the metaphor life is illness, which draws a connection between two things that seem like opposites. But when we read the rest of the poem, where he talks about how Annie has died and he's grieving her, but that he will get to see her again soon, we realize, oh, okay, grief does kind of feel like being sick, and dying or having an escape from that would probably feel like getting over that sickness. It surprises us. It opens our eyes to something new, and our brains love that shit. So here's another one that comes from the beginning of Brenda Hillman's Yellow Tractate. Smart daffodils, they waited till the cold snap was over, then brought themselves into the corridor like lamps of pity. In these lines, we have two interesting metaphors. We have a row of daffodils being called a corridor, and the daffodils themselves being called lamps of pity. These metaphors make you think about things in a way you haven't thought of before, and they work. Rows of daffodils are kind of like a corridor, like walls that you walk between and that maybe feel a little claustrophobic. And the heads of daffodils do look kind of like lamps that are bowing their heads in pity. Metaphors force us to imagine connections between unlike things. Death and freedom, life and illness, daffodils and lamps. And by forcing us to imagine that, our minds are opened. We can now see different angles that we'd never have imagined before reading that poem. When you are writing a metaphor, you need to make sure that it isn't cliché. Stop comparing death to a candle going out, stop comparing love to fire, stop comparing sex or abusive relationships to drugs. If you aren't making new connections or subverting the expectations that come with old cliché connections, then you need to find a new angle. And if you're struggling to make a metaphor, but you have one in there somewhere, you just can't find it, please, for the love of all that is holy in this world, do not do this. Des, you are kind of driving me up the wall. New interesting connections and new weird overlaps between ideas are fundamental to the power of your poem. Metaphors are the backbone of your poem because metaphors, interesting connections that make us think about the world around us in ways we never would have come up with on our own, are the most important tool that you have at your disposal. All right. So we have all these elements, these concrete images decorated with details, all of it tied together with metaphors, but like, what makes it have that poetry thing, you know? Well, poems need language that sounds good to our ears and tastes good when we read it aloud. And sound is important because it elicits feelings and makes us think about things in a new way. Because we aren't used to sound being a top priority in the things we read. We're used to content and purpose and all that rhetorical garbage being what the writer is most focused on. But in poetry, the content comes second to the aesthetic. And one of the most important elements of aesthetic, at least in poetry, is sound. So when things sound interesting and weird and different and like really good, we're caught off guard and then pulled in. I'm going to read the last stanza of T.S. Eliot's The Lovesong of J. Alfred Prufrock, and I want you to close your eyes and listen to the sounds of the words as I read them. I have seen them riding seaward on the waves, combing the white hair of the waves blown back when the wind blows the water white and black. We have lingered in the chambers of the sea, by sea girls wreathed with seaweed red and brown, till human voices wake us and we drown. All of the vowel sounds and consonant sounds in that stanza are working together, and the pleasing nature of these sounds is what we call mellifluous language. This mellifluous language helps the reader glide through the poem, carried along by the waves of the words, sometimes abruptly interrupted by rocky consonants. It gives a rhythm to the poem. It makes us want to keep going. It calls to us and leads us into the depths of the lines like a linguistic siren. So what does this mean when it comes to you writing your own poems? Well, I'm not gonna throw a bunch of words at you and then give you a vocabulary test, but what it comes down to is this. Make it sound good. Find words that have internal rhymes, that have similar consonant sounds, that have syllables that feel rhythmic and kind of make you want to dance or bob your head a little when you read them. That is where the music of poetry comes from. And that is what will make your poem sing. Poems allow us to see the world through new eyes. This is why a lot of those poetry rules that we talked about at the beginning are wrong and bad. Because all those things, like strict rhyme schemes, formal structure, cliche metaphors, have all been done. They've been done for hundreds of years. They've been done to death. They don't make us feel things. They don't give us anything new to think about. But that isn't to say that you should totally ignore all of those elements. They can be good, but only when they're used in the right way and used with purpose and used with caution. You're allowed to do whatever you want as long as you have a good reason for it. What I mean is this. Let's think of poems like food. All the poetic elements you have to choose from are different ingredients and spices. And when you're choosing which ingredients to include in your dish, you must do so with purpose. You don't just blindly grab things out of your fridge and dump it all into a pot and it's dinner. Let's explore this metaphor a little bit more. So there are no inherently bad spices, but not every spice works in every dish. Garlic, like rhyming, is fine, and it's been used by lots of people in lots of dishes, so much so that it kind of feels like you have to include it if you're making anything savory. But you don't have to. You can cut back, only use a little bit here and there, because too much can be incredibly overwhelming. You don't want the garlic to be the only thing that people remember from your poem, or your food. Metaphors are like flavor combinations. Yeah, there are the cliches like peanut butter and chocolate, and those are good and fine, but they're not exciting. They're something that you lean on as a comfort food. They're not doing anything groundbreaking in the world of culinary science. Good metaphors are the flavor combinations that you're a little bit scared of, a little nervous to try because the ingredients are so different. How could it possibly work? Like peanut butter on a bacon cheeseburger, or cheddar cheese on your apple pie. These are weird-ass combinations, but surprisingly, they taste really good. And good poets, like food scientists, have studied enough and have learned enough about the chemical makeup of the stuff they're working with that they have a good idea of what will work and what won't. There are always new things to discover, but they don't have to reinvent the wheel each time they write a metaphor or pair two foods together. And in poems, as in food, presentation is important. Well, it can be. You can put most things on a plate or in a bowl, like most poems are left aligned. And that's great, and it's classic, and no one will think you're boring for doing so. I mean, I left align most of my poems. But there are also restaurants that purposefully put their food in weird containers. You know, the hipster restaurants that feed you a salad in a light bulb or soup out of a mason jar. These places exist. And people love them. Just like they love E.E. Cummings, who personally murdered conventional line structure. And this is the same for line length, too. There are some people who like bigger servings and some people who like smaller servings, and some foods that work better in bigger servings or smaller servings, and both are perfectly fine in different contexts. And ultimately, when you make a dish or write a poem, there will be people who don't like it. There are people out there who don't like pizza. Actually, and this is true, my best friend in grade school didn't like pizza. Or water, actually, for that matter. She always had to put those, like, flavor powders in her bottles of water that she brought for lunch. I'm sorry, Emily, if you're watching this, you are perfect just the way you are, even if you do have some pretty unacceptable food preferences. Love you. But, all that to say, there will be people who don't like your poems, and you have to be okay with that. Because there will also be people for whom your writing is their favorite food. So before I close out this video, I want to show you what all of this advice actually looks like when it comes to the actual writing of poems. But before I hop over to the writing cam, I first want to bring up two of the books that I used for this video. So most of the ideas for this video came from stuff that I've learned while in creative writing classes and just doing the writing, but I also got some of the more concrete tips from these two books. Why Poetry by Matthew Zapruder is more about the philosophy of poetry, and the Poetry Home Repair Manual by previous US Poet Laureate Ted Kooser is more about like the actual concrete, pragmatic, here's how to write a good poem stuff. They are both super great, and I highly recommend them if you are interested in writing poetry. And as always, I will have links to these and everything else I can link to down in the description below. Alright, let's hop over to my little writing cam and write a poem. And if you're not interested in this bit, go ahead and fast forward to the timestamp on screen, but for the rest of us, let's head on over. Okay, so when you're writing a poem, Jeez Louise. So when you're writing a poem, the first thing that you want to come up with is some sort of particular image or a memory or something very concrete that you can work from. And what I want to use today is this image of, so in the house we're renting, we have this screened in back porch, and we've had these huge bumblebees that really love that porch. And we've had this one in particular who has been on the screen for like 3 days, and I don't know if it's alive or not, and I'm kind of afraid to touch it to figure out if it's alive or not, because I don't want to hurt it, and like, I don't know that I want to know whether it's alive or not. So I think that there's some really fun things that we can work with there and some interesting ideas. So that is the image that I'm going to be working with today. So let's start with describing this bumblebee. Let's say she. I don't know anything about sexing bees. I don't actually know if it's a female, but we're gonna go with it for the sake of this poem. She clings to the window. I'm also changing, I'm not gonna describe this like screened in porch because I think that that might be a little too much. That might be a little too complicated for what we're going to be talking about. So let's say she clings to the window, all pollen and puff, because, you know, bumblebees, butts covered in pollen, they're super puffy, has some good sounds with the P's and the L's. And I want to talk about her wings moving kind of slowly. So let's say she lazily stretches her. Now I want to describe her wings without being cliche. So they're see-through. So the easy thing I think would be to compare it to glass, but I don't think I want to go that way. The way that they're segmented, they almost look like a bunch of bubbles. So I think I'm going to go that direction. Let's say she has soap bubble wings. Okay, let's bring in some movement here. Let's say she is shuddering into the breeze as it, let's talk about what the breeze is doing. It is, what's a good word? Buffeting. As it buffets against her. Let's finish up describing her. What does she look like? Let's maybe describe her fur a little bit, because we've talked about her wings, but the big thing with bumblebees is, you know, they're fluffy. Ooh, let's actually anthropomorphize her a little bit by giving her a fur coat. Let's describe her fur as a fur coat. In her antique fur coat, so precious and small. So she's little, she's precious, she has this antique fur coat. Perfect. All right, so we love this bee. Let's bring in the viewer and bring in some action with that. So let's say you, what do? You watch her move with the wind. And now we can bring in that question of, is she alive or not? And wonder if it's her or the wind that, I want to say, like, that moves her, that pushes her, that like generates her movement. Ooh, compels. Let's say that compels each. So what is a movement of when you're kind of pushed by something and it's not really like regular, let's say lurch. Let's say trembling lurch. Of her wings. And then we get this nice pattern of wind, wind, wings here. So that's good. Okay, you watch her move with the wind and wonder if it's her or the wind that compels each trembling lurch of her wings. Okay, let's do a final stanza and see how we can finish this up. So now we want to kind of confront that issue of if we touch her, then we will know if she's alive or dead. Okay, so you could, U-L-D, you could reach out with like a fingertip. I'm kind of thinking like, you know, very delicate, a fingertip touch against, I want to say that it's like, you know, this very, I don't know, like untouchable, I guess we could say untouchable, fingertip touch against the untouchable. So let's bring in a simile here. Let's compare this to something that actually would like break or crumble if you touched it. So the first thing that's kind of popping into my head is somebody working with like really ancient documents. So things that are, you know, hundreds and hundreds of years old, and you have to be very tender and careful with them or they will just, you know, turn into dust. So I like that. So I think I'm going to go with that. So let's say like an archivist or archivist, depending on how you want to pronounce that, poring over some forgotten lore, because then we have pouring and lore, those are good sounds working together. This is also technically, I guess, a Raven reference, so that's fun. Okay, so I want to do more to visualize just how lightly they are touching this document. And I could say something about, you know, like hair. Hair is a very common thing when you're talking about light touches. But I think since we've been talking about fingers here, I think that I might bring in fingerprints and like the grooves in your fingerprints, and maybe the edge of the page is just resting in those grooves of your fingertips. An ancient, let's say the edge of a page, page's edge, resting in the grooves of your fingerprints. I also want it to be kind of like you're holding your breath. So let's say a breathless, and like you're searching for something in these pages, but you know that if you find it, or like if you keep looking, then you're inevitably going to cause this very delicate thing to crumble. I think that's how I want to end this. So let's say a breathless searching. Do I want to say a breathless searching so silent, or a breathless silent searching? Let's say so silent. For an answer that you know can only be found in the crumbling of the page. And I'm running out of room, so I'm gonna put it over here, but it would just go right below into dust. All right, so now for the title. I mean, I feel like we have to name this title or name this poem after the bee. It'd just be like Ode to the Bumblebee. I mean, I feel like that's kind of boring, but ooh, or what if it's like, well, I don't want to go the direction of like it being, you know, a funeral thing for this bee because we don't know that it's dead. Let's just say Ode to the Bumblebee. Okay, let's head back over to the main camera and see what we think about this poem that we've written. So while this poem isn't perfect, I think the plot could be tightened up a little bit. I think it meanders a little bit. I do think that we have a lot of really good sounds and a lot of nice images, and I really like the simile there at the end with the ancient text. Now, revising poems takes a lot of time and a lot of work. It takes like weeks to do, so I'm not gonna do that now. But in the meantime, I dedicate this not quite perfect poem to my newest necromancer patron, Comrade Fox. So for you, Comrade Fox, this is Ode to the Bumblebee. She clings to the window, all pollen and puff, and lazily stretches her soap bubble wings, shuddering into the breeze as it buffets against her in her antique fur coat, so precious and small. You watch her move with the wind, and wonder if it's her or the wind that compels each trembling lurch of her wings. You could reach out, a fingertip touch against the untouchable, like an archivist poring over some forgotten lore, an ancient page's edge resting in the grooves of your fingerprints. A breathless searching so silent for an answer you know can only be found in the crumbling of the page into dust. Oh, little quicksilver, puddle of heavy wetness, dry and cold, or some deceptive stone, so smooth but untouchable. I hold you in my hands, your lifeless, unlife existence against my skin. And then, there you are. A silver snake. With each twitch and heartbeat shudder, you spring to life, coil, uncoil, venom dripping from icicle teeth, alive and whole, and here. And here. What this all comes down to, really, is that poetry is complicated, but just not as complicated as your high school English teacher may have taught you that it is. Poetry is meant to help us feel new things and think new thoughts, to see connections between things that we wouldn't have thought to connect on our own, to enter into a conscious dream, an experience that is equal parts surreal and authentic, to see through the eyes of someone who has seen the strings that connect the loops of the universe. But poetry is also just words on a page. Words that are chosen very carefully, but they're still just words. And like I've said before on this channel, you have all the freedom in the world to play with words. I want you to play with words. Play with language, play with poetry, put words together that are silly or weird or sound funny or sound beautiful. Look for the connections between things. Next time you spill something, look for a recognizable shape in the puddle. Look up at the clouds and find animals and flowers and faces and feelings. Go sit in the park and just be. And then put that into words. Choose your words carefully. Avoid abstractions. Be purposeful, and then write. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. This month is actually National Poetry Month here in the US, and I didn't realize that until after writing this thing, so funny how that works out. So I am actually considering doing some poetry writing on a live stream where you all would get to like give me input and help actually shape the poem. If that would be interesting for you all, I will definitely do it, so let me know in the comments. I'm not sure if that's something I would do on Twitch or here on YouTube. I've never used Twitch. I'm kind of scared of Twitch. I don't know. I'll figure it out. Let me know what you think. And let me know if there's anything here in this video that you want me to do a deep dive into, and I can. Part of me wants to make videos talking specifically about bad poetry and the pitfalls that you can run into there. This would be stuff from folks like Gabbie, Hanna, but I also don't know if that's something that I want to like indulge, and if I would rather just like stay positive and not, you know, talk about bad things. But if you want me to do a stream or a video where I do that, let me know. Also, today's illustrations were done by Odd, who is an artist that I've started working with on my videos, and aren't these just the cutest things? They are so wonderful and I love them so much. Go give her some love in the comments and be sure to check out her portfolio in the description. She is amazing. Also, today's video was edited by the wonderful Neil Farrell. Hopefully I'm pronouncing your last name correctly. But they are a fellow content creator. I will link to their channel in the description. Thank you so much. Obviously I'm just, you know, sitting here filming this right now, but presumably you all have just watched a wonderfully edited video that is better than anything I could make, so give them some love as well. Anyway, if you want more of me, you can come follow me on Twitter at Zoe_the_Bee. And if you want to help me make more of this kind of thing, then feel free to join us on Patreon, where you can get cool stuff like polls and getting videos early and even getting poems written for you by me. Speaking of which, today's video was brought to you by the horrifying and terrible eldritch abominations known as Zauber, Sigwa, Ryan, and A Tasty Snack. And in order to honor the newest one, I am going to read a poem I wrote well before this video. So for A Tasty Snack, this is A Patch of Violets Visited Twice. I was barefoot in the backyard, surrounded at a glance by half-smoked cigarettes, all hand-rolled by some tender rodent hand, or else by Earth herself, and then placed in delicate green cigarette holders, fit for upper-crust chipmunks and moles. I returned to find it gentrified, no longer that ashtray patch of white on green, but a new blue. No more tender paws and imagined smoke rings, but hoods splayed wide and bathed in spoiled wine with a musty skunkness from sitting too long in the sun. Until next time, stay safe, stay warm, and I will see y'all again soon, I hope. Bye, folks.